Do you own a Sony TV? If so, I think you've come to the right place because in this video, I'll be walking you through what to do with some of the Sony settings that are available to you when you hit that settings button. The goal of this video is to just teach you what all the settings do and to help you get some of the better settings meant for you. Now, I'm not trying to give you the most accurate settings or the best settings overall. And if you want the most accurate settings, I highly recommend going to a professional calibrator and getting it done that way. But if you're not really after accuracy, I think I can help you get to the right settings for you. Now, the settings that I'm using in this video are being applied to an A95K Sony QD OLED, which is what you are seeing on screen right now. And everything that I talk about with the settings, I'll display with an on-screen graphic instead of actually going through the menu system itself. I believe doing it this way will help you follow the video a little bit better and have more clear instructions on what to do and what each setting will do. Now, these are for OLED TVs and QD OLED TVs, but I have had people tell me that these settings work just fine for an X95K or an X95J, so go ahead and give it a try. Like I said, you can always just reset it if you don't like it. With all that out of the way, let's start with the main settings. So for HDR viewing, the best picture profile to use is going to be custom. So we're going to do everything in the custom profile because I do think that's going to get you mostly where you need to be. Now, when it comes to HDR, the brightness factor, you really just want to have brightness at max. This is something that you never want to really lower below max or you will get a worse picture quality overall. So keep it at max for HDR. For SDR, I'm going to go ahead and tell you that you should just adapt this to whatever lighting you're using for your home. So if you're in a little bit of a brighter room, maybe you want your SDR brightness to be at around 35 to 40. It really just depends on your environment, and you should tweak this depending on where you're sitting. So if you're in a dark room, I find that 20 to 25 is fine. And the other thing you might want to do is change the peak brightness, but remember, HDR is always going to be at max. The next thing is contrast, and I use contrast at 90 for both HDR and SDR. The next one is going to be HDR tone mapping. For this, I like to set it to gradation preferred. It feels like it is going to be the best overall image for me in HDR. I want to say though, some people do like the brightness preferred setting better, so go ahead and try that out too. I've noticed that in brighter scenes, you can definitely get a little bit more out of the brightness preferred. Now, it is really scene dependent on which one you'll like better, most likely. So I do recommend just trying them out and seeing which one you like better, watching the same scene, but twice, just using the different modes. And also try these out when you're gaming as well, but we'll get to gaming a little bit later. The next one is black level. I leave this at 50. If you have an OLED TV like the A80J or the A90J, there were some instances where you wanted to go ahead and raise this by 1 or lower it by 1, but I think those were just firmware issues, and I haven't found the need to ever really raise or lower my black level since I was reviewing that unit for the A90J. I do know there are some specific cases where you would lower or raise the black level, but right here, I like to just leave it at 50 if everything is working as intended. There shouldn't be a reason to want to lower or raise this unless you are experiencing some black crush or you were thinking that your black levels were a little bit raised. Now, if you really want to tinker with some of the blacks, the best way to do it, in my opinion, is using Black Adjust. I think that this is a really cool tool that a lot of people might like for their personal preference, so go ahead and try the Black Adjust out. This is really a personal preference setting. Some people hate this setting, some people love this setting. I happen to be somebody who really likes this setting, and I use it on medium, so go ahead and give it a try. The next one is going to be Advanced Contrast Enhancer. Now, I'm not somebody who usually uses Contrast Enhancer, but on Sony TVs, I actually really like the Advanced Contrast Enhancer, and again, this is more of a personal preference setting, but Advanced Contrast Enhancer on medium is what I like to go with. If you want to bring a little bit more oomph to your picture, this is a really good setting to use. Alright, the next one is Peak Luminance. For HDR, just keep this at high. There's no real reason to lower the peak luminance in HDR. After all, it is HDR, you want this at high. If you're enjoying these settings so far and you feel like this video is helpful, please consider subscribing for future videos just like this, and click that notification bell for alerts for when I go live or post a new video. Remember, all the settings videos that I do are going to be free, but if you want to show your extra support, in the comment section, leave a comment telling me what your favorite TV is, or you can leave a super thanks with that same comment to directly support the channel. Thank you guys again for clicking this video. Let's get on to the rest of the settings. Alright, that was brightness. Let's move on to clarity. You really don't want to touch sharpness because sharpness is going to make your image look a little bit blurrier if you lower it, and if you make it higher, then it will raise the sharpness and have it look really bad. Honestly, if you want a little bit more image clarity, then you gotta go with reality creation for that, because reality creation will kind of raise that perceived sharpness, but only in the areas that's needed. If you want to know what reality creation does, I did a whole video talking about that, and I encourage you to check that video out after this one. But I gotta say, I love reality creation. I recommend you guys try it out. At 20, it's really good. At auto, it kind of does the work for you. And if you want to raise it to like 40 to 50, you are really going to get some unreal pop. And when I say unreal pop, it's going to look unrealistic, but some people like this, and I want you to try it out and see if you'll like it first before you knock it. But for most, 20 will be the sweet spot, or go ahead and try it on auto. The next one, random noise reduction and digital noise reduction. I'm going to group these two up because I use both on auto, and when these settings are on, it can clean up the image quite well. And I know there are some downsides to using this, but I think the upsides greatly outweigh the downsides, especially when you're talking about cleaning up some of the film grain that's just excessive looking on OLED TVs. In my opinion, I just see some of the film grain on an LG TV, and I just did not like that look at all for certain movies, but I watched those same movies on a Sony TV with these settings on, and I'm just like, well, I don't notice that problem anymore. So I do recommend using these settings if film grain is something that bothers you, or if you're just trying to clean up a lower resolution signal. If you don't and you just want to see the source as is, turn these off. Speaking of cleaning up the image, smooth gradation is going to help a lot if you see any color banding in the sky. If you see a movie like The Martian, for example, this is a really good example that has gradients in the sky. You might want to smooth that out if you're having issues with it. Now, I gotta say, the native handling of this with the processor is really good, so I just keep it on low. I don't really need it on higher beyond that. There is a downside to using it on high. You will notice that some of the more sharper textures will tend to look a little bit blurrier, so fine details can get messed up by using this setting on high. Thankfully though, I never found any reason to use it beyond going past low, so I think you guys will be just fine leaving it on low. There is an exception though. If we're talking about gaming, sometimes you do want to put this on high because this will be something you really want in games. Next, let's go over the color. Color is really important for a lot of people, and this is going to kind of rely on personal preference, as well as some of these settings will really just depend on what you like. So let's start off with color. Keep this at 50 unless you feel the need to raise it a little bit to add a little bit of saturation. I like to do this a different way, which I'll get to in just a second. So I do keep it at 50. The next one is hue. You leave this at 0 most of the time. I never really see a reason to change hue, so hue at 0 is always what I go with. The next one is going to be color temperature. I personally keep this at Expert 1. It's just what I'm used to. It's what I like with Sony TVs, and it's just what my eyes have been accustomed to. Now, your mileage may vary, and you might like a different color temperature. Maybe you like something a little bit cooler, then you set it to that. It's really up to you at the end of the day. So remember, that's just going to depend on what you like. The next one, also a personal preference setting, live color. This is adding a little bit more saturation, a little bit more boost to the color. I like it on medium. I really do. I think that it's a good sweet spot for live color. Low doesn't seem to add too much, and maybe that's a little subtle boost that a lot of people will like, but medium is just enough of that boost that I do like it. For those of you that are in love with that Samsung look, that more saturated look, try it on high. I think you guys will enjoy it if you're coming from a Samsung TV. Next one is motion. Now, motion is very subjective and it will depend on how you like motion. So it depends on you, really. But center motion is something that I set to high. After that, motion flow, you go to custom. The next one is the smoothness slider, and I think that keeping this on 2 is my sweet spot. I just like it on 2. You can get away with max, but you have to remember that using the smoothness slider can result in some artifacts, just like other motion interpolation adjustments. So yeah, make sure that you're aware of that before you change it. Then the next one is going to be clearness. This is just black frame insertion, and remember that on some of the newer Sony TVs, you really only have 60 Hz available to you, but for those of you that have, say, a Sony A80K, you do have access to the 120 Hz black frame insertion. Alright, so now for the gamers, I have a special section for you guys because I am a gamer myself, and I wanted to tell you the adjustments that I make with game mode, and some of the adjustments that you can make. Even though I don't make them myself, they are an option for you, so let's go over those. So for HDR gaming specifically, remember how I was telling you about the HDR tone mapping? I use gradation preferred most of the time. Well, in the game mode, I actually use brightness preferred most of the time because I feel like it is going to give me the brightest, most impactful gaming experience, and that's what I have experienced with HDR tone mapping on a Sony TV. I just like brightness preferred. It's a thing that I actually think is more of a preference for me. So even though I use gradation preferred in most things, in gaming, I do change it to brightness preferred. I've seen an impact with highlights in gaming specifically. In fact, on the A95K, I did notice that using brightness preferred got it to look very similar to game HDR on the S95B, which I did prefer before they changed it on the update. So I talked about this briefly, but smooth gradation is going to be an important one for gamers because sometimes it just looks really bad with the color banding. So for this, smooth gradation on high can fix a lot of that. Now there is a downside, like I mentioned, it will cause a little bit of a more blurry look to the image, but sometimes it's a better looking image than just having this ugly color banding on your screen. The next one, reality creation. Sometimes I change this depending on the game that I play. More lower resolution games, Nintendo Switch games for example, sometimes even lower resolution 4K titles like Elden Ring, where it does have some lower resolution textures in there. I do like to clean that up with reality creation a little bit higher than I normally have it. So 35 to 40 sometimes I will use even when gaming. But again, this is personal preference, so try it out yourself. The next one, I don't personally touch myself, but it is an option for you, and that will be the video signal option. The video signal option can convert the SDR games into an HLG signal, which is going to give you that HDR look. And some people like this, but I personally do not like it, and I think it leads to too many image artifacts for my taste. But just because I don't like it doesn't mean that you won't, and I respect that. I recognize that, so I wanted to tell you guys about that, because I think it's important to make people aware of something like that, especially if I know other people might like it. If you do use this mode, please tell me in the comments why you like this mode and what you find useful when it comes to setting up this mode, because maybe that'll help out somebody else in the comments. Also, did you guys find these settings useful? If you did, please leave a comment and hit the thumbs up button. It helps out the channel so much. And subscribe for more content just like this and future TV reviews. Oh yeah, remember how I was talking about that setting reality creation earlier? Well, I did make a video talking all about reality creation, so if you want to learn more about that, you can check out that video right here.